Most men look devastated when their marriage ends. Daniel Bennett looked like he had just won the lottery. He stood in the hallway of the distinct court, checking his reflection in the glass, straightening his bespoke Italian tie. He thought he had pulled off the heist of the century, keeping the multi-million-dollar tech firm, the Hamptons estate, and his freedom, leaving his wife Sarah with nothing but scraps. But Daniel forgot one thing. He forgot who Sarah's father was. He forgot that in a game of chess you don't celebrate until the king is cornered. And the king was about to walk through the door. The air in the private conference room of the Manhattan Superior Court smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee, but to Daniel Bennett it smelled like victory. 90%, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he leaned toward his attorney, Richard Halloway. We got 90% of the liquid assets, Richard, and the company remains entirely under my control. I honestly didn't think she'd fold this easily. Richard, a man whose smile was as sharp and practiced as a surgeon's scalpel, nodded while organizing the stack of documents on the mahogany table. Sarah's counsel was weak, Daniel. They prioritized the alimony schedule over the equity split. It's a rookie mistake, but one we are happy to exploit, as long as the judge signs off on the summary judgment in 10 minutes. You are a free man, and a very, very rich one. Daniel leaned back in the leather chair, clasping his hands behind his head. He was 42, but he looked 35, thanks to a regimen of expensive skincare, personal trainers, and the distinct glow of a man who believed the world revolved around him. He had built Bennett and Company from the ground up, or so he told everyone. It was a logistics software firm that had recently secured a massive government contract. That contract was the golden goose, and Sarah. She was just the woman who had been there when he started the quiet background noise to his symphony of success. She didn't even fight for the house in the Hamptons. Daniel laughed, a short, barking sound. Can you believe that I expected a war? I expected her to drag her father into this. But silence. Radio silence. Arthur Sterling is a retired watchmaker. Daniel. Richard scoffed, checking his Rolex. What was he going to do, fix your clock? The man has been a ghost since the wedding. I doubt he even knows what a summary judgment is. Daniel smirked. He remembered Arthur Sterling, a stoic, grey-haired man with calloused hands and eyes that seemed to look right through you. At the wedding 10 years ago, Arthur hadn't said a word during the toasts. He had just handed Daniel a vintage pocket watch, patted him on the shoulder, and walked away. Daniel had sold the watch a year later to buy a set of golf clubs. He doubted Sarah even noticed. It's better this way, Daniel said, standing up and pacing the small room. Sarah was limiting. She wanted a family. She wanted quiet weekends. I want the cover of Forbes. I want the penthouse in London. Today, Richard, the dead weight is finally cut loose. He pulled his phone out and sent a text to Jessica, his executive assistant of 6 months. Done deal. Champagne on ice at the plaza. 1 p.m. The vibration of the phone in his hand felt like a heartbeat. He was winning. He had outsmarted the lawyers, outmaneuvered his wife, and secured his empire. Let's go, Richard said, snapping his briefcase shut. Judge Parker is waiting. Try to look somber, Daniel. Don't look like you're about to pop a bottle of Dom Perignon in the middle of the courtroom. I can act sad, Daniel winked. I'm a businessman, aren't I? Acting is half the job. They exited the conference room, walking down the marble hallway with the confident stride of predators. Daniel felt invincible. He adjusted his cufflinks, feeling the cool gold against his wrists. He had no idea that the ink on the divorce papers was about to become the most expensive signature of his life. Inside courtroom 304. The atmosphere was suffocatingly still. Sarah Bennett sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was wearing a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore no jewelry, not even the diamond stud earrings Daniel had bought her for their 5th anniversary, the ones he had bought to apologize for missing her birthday. To the casual observer, Sarah looked defeated. She looked like a woman who had been crushed by the weight of a high-powered husband and a ruthless legal system. Her lawyer, a young, somewhat frazzled public attorney named Timothy Clark, was shuffling papers nervously, dropping a pen, picking it up, and dropping it again. But if you looked closely at Sarah's eyes, you wouldn't see defeat. You would see the eerily calm surface of a deep, dark lake. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Bennett?" Timothy whispered, leaning in. "We can still contest the property division. The judge hasn't entered the room yet. We can ask for a recess. You're walking away with the Honda and a monthly stipend that barely covers rent in the city. The company, you helped him start that company." Sarah turned her head slowly. "I'm sure, Timothy. Let him have it. Let him have the company. Let him have the house. Let him have the victory." "But, Timothy," she said, her voice soft but laced with steel, "Daniel measures his worth in things he can count. Money, cars, square footage. If I take those away, he fights. If I give them to him, he lowers his guard. He thinks he's won. That's exactly where I need him." Timothy blinked, confused. He had been assigned this case pro bono and had expected a weeping housewife. Instead, he felt like he was sitting next to a bomb disposal expert. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Daniel and Richard strode in, bringing a gust of expensive cologne and arrogance with them. Daniel didn't even look at Sarah. He walked straight to the defense table, pulled out his chair, and sat down with a heavy sigh running a hand through his hair, as if he were exhausted by the burden of his own brilliance. Richard Halloway leaned over the aisle. "Tim, good to see you. I trust we're just rubber stamping to the agreement today. No last-minute theatrics." "We are proceeding as discussed," Timothy said, his voice cracking slightly. Daniel turned his head, finally acknowledging his wife. He offered a sad, patronizing smile. "Sarah, you look... well, I hope you're holding up." "I'm fine, Daniel," she said. Her voice was flat. "Good. Look, I know this is hard," Daniel said, loud enough for the court stenographer to hear. "But it's for the best. You'll be taken care of. The alimony is generous. You can finally take those painting classes you talked about." Sarah didn't blink. "Thank you for your concern." Daniel turned back to his lawyer, suppressing a grin. Painting classes. God, she was pathetic. He had expected screaming. He had expected her to throw the affair in his face, even though she couldn't prove it. But this resignation, it was pathetic, but it made his life easier. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "The Honorable Judge Evelyn Parker presiding." Judge Parker swept into the room, a formidable woman with sharp glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took her seat, arranged her robes, and looked over the rim of her spectacles at the two parties. "We are here for the final decree of divorce in the matter of Bennett versus..." "Bennett," Judge Parker said, "I have reviewed the settlement agreement. It appears heavily weighted toward the defendant, Mr. Bennett." "My client just wants peace, Your Honor," Richard Halloway said, smoothly standing up. "Mrs. Bennett has agreed to all terms. We have the signatures right here." "Mrs. Bennett," The judge looked at Sarah. "Is this true? You are waiving your claim to the marital home and the intellectual property of Bennett and Company. I must remind you that New York is an equitable distribution state. You are entitled to a fair share." Sarah stood up. "I understand, Your Honor. I am willing to sign. I want nothing from Bennett and Company. I want a clean break." Daniel felt a rush of dopamine. It was happening. It was actually happening. "Very well." Judge Parker sighed, picking up her gavel. "If there are no further objections or witnesses to be heard regarding the asset division." The courtroom was silent. Daniel watched the gavel rise. He was already mentally popping the cork on the champagne. 3, 2, creak. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they groaned. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was wearing a wool coat that looked 30 years old and a flat cap. He held a cane, not for support, but like a weapon he was resting. Daniel frowned. It was Arthur, Sarah's father. Great, Daniel thought. Here comes the guilt trip. The old watchmaker is here to cry. Arthur Sterling didn't look at Sarah. He didn't look at the judge. His eyes locked directly onto Daniel, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Bennett felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Arthur took a step forward, the cane clicking loudly on the parquet floor. "I object," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resonance that seemed to vibrate against the wood paneling. "I object to the distribution of assets, specifically the assets that do not belong to Mr. Bennett to begin with." "Order," Judge Parker barked, though she looked more intrigued than annoyed. "Sir, this is a closed hearing. Who are you?" "I am Arthur Sterling," the old man said, walking slowly down the center aisle. He moved with a strange, fluid grace for a man of his age. Father of the plaintiff, and the actual owner of the property Mr. Bennett is so eager to claim. Daniel laughed. He actually laughed out loud. He couldn't help it. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. This is my father-in-law. He's a retired watch repairman from Queens. He's obviously confused/distraught about the divorce. Richard, can we please remove him?" Richard Halloway stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, Mr. Sterling has no standing here. He is not a party to this lawsuit. This is a highly emotional time for the family, and we suggest—" "Sit down, Mr. Halloway," Judge Parker said. Her eyes narrowed at Arthur. "Mr. Sterling, you claimed ownership." "That is a bold statement. Mr. Bennett is the registered CEO and founder of Bennett and Company. The deed to the Hamptons estate is in his name." Arthur finally reached the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. He reached into his oversized wool coat. The bailiff's hand twitched toward his belt, but Arthur didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. It was old, the leather cracked and faded, tied with a simple red string. "Paper," Arthur said, tossing the folder onto the defense table in front of Daniel. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished wood and knocking over Daniel's water glass. "What is this?" Daniel snapped, jumping up to avoid the water. "This is harassment." "Open it, Daniel," Sarah said. Daniel froze. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him since the proceedings began. Her voice wasn't flat anymore. It was cold. Daniel looked at Richard. Richard shrugged, looking annoyed. "Let's just humor him so the judge sees we're being reasonable, then we'll have him escorted out." Daniel grabbed the folder. His hands were shaking with rage. He untied the string and flipped it open. The first page wasn't a legal document. It was a photo. A black and white photo of a young Arthur Sterling standing next to a man Daniel recognized instantly from history books, a titan of industry from the 1970s. They were shaking hands in front of a factory. "Nice picture," Daniel sneered. "So you met a famous guy once. What does that prove?" "Turn the page," Arthur said. Daniel flipped the page. It was a deed of trust, dated 15 years ago, 5 years before Daniel and Sarah even met. The Sterling Family Blind Trust. Daniel scanned the document. Legalese. Jargon. He looked at Richard. Richard leaned in his eyes, scanning the page. Suddenly the color drained from Richard's face. The arrogance vanished, replaced by the sheer terror of a lawyer who realizes he has missed the smoking gun. "Daniel," Richard whispered, Did you ever run a title search on the Hamptons property, going back more than 10 years? "Why would I?" Daniel hissed. "I bought it from that shell company in the Cayman Islands. It was a steal." "Read the beneficiary clause." Arthur's voice cut through the whispers. Daniel looked down. The assets held by the Sterling Family Blind Trust, including all real estate holdings and the intellectual property assigned to the subsidiary Vector Logic, remain the sole property of the trust until the beneficiary, Sarah Sterling, reaches the age of 45, or upon the dissolution of her marriage, at which point all assets revert to the direct control of the trust's executor. Executor Arthur James Sterling. "I don't understand," Daniel stammered. "Vector Logic. That's the back-end code. That's the core of my software." "Your software?" Arthur stepped through the gate, ignoring the bailiff. "Daniel, you're a salesman. You couldn't code a microwave to pop popcorn. When you started your company, you needed a back-end. Sarah gave it to you. She gave you the code." "She wrote some basic script," Daniel shouted. "I built the empire. She gave you the code," Arthur corrected, "which was owned by Vector Logic, a shell company owned by my trust. You signed a licensing agreement 10 years ago. Do you remember? You were in a rush to get funding. You signed a stack of papers Sarah gave you." Daniel's mind raced back. The early days, the chaotic nights, Sarah handling the paperwork while he schmoozed investors. He had signed everything she put in front of him. He trusted her. Or rather, he thought she was too stupid to trick him. "That license," Arthur continued, "was revocable, instantly, upon divorce." Arthur smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a trapped rabbit. "Daniel, you don't own the software. You don't own the house. You don't even own the chair you're sitting in. You have been leasing your life from me for 10 years, and the lease just expired." The courtroom went deadly silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing. Daniel looked at the document. Then he looked at Sarah. Sarah was smiling now. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tube of lipstick. She applied it slowly, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. "I think," Sarah said, snapping the compact shut, "we should talk about alimony. But I don't think I'll be the one paying it." Daniel felt the room spin. "Richard, do something. Tell them this is fake." Richard Halloway was frantically typing on his phone. "I'm checking the corporate registry now." "Oh, God." Richard looked up, pale as a sheet. "The holding company for the Hamptons house. It links back to Sterling Trust and Vector Logic. Daniel, they own the patent numbers. They own the IP." "Meaning?" Daniel screamed. "Meaning cool." Richard swallowed hard. "Without their license, Bennett and Company." is just an empty shell selling illegal pirated software. If they pull the license, the government contract is void. You'll be sued for fraud. You'll go to federal prison. Daniel dropped into his chair. He looked at Arthur Sterling, the man he had mocked, the man he had called a watchmaker. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered. Arthur leaned on his cane, looking down at his son-in-law. "I'm the man who fixes things," Arthur said. "And you, Daniel, are broken." Judge Parker's gavel did not come down. Instead, she lowered it slowly, resting the handle against the bench, her eyes darting between the cracked leather folder and the sweating face of Richard Halloway. "Mr. Halloway," Judge Parker said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I'm looking at a notarized trust deed that predates this marriage. I am also looking at a licensing agreement that appears to grant Mr. Bennett use of the vector logic source code solely on a renewable basis. A license that, according to Mr. Sterling, has just been revoked." Richard Halloway was no longer the smooth operator who had walked in expecting a victory lap. He was frantically flipping through the documents Arthur had thrown on the table. Papers flew, scattering onto the floor. "Your Honor, this is an ambush," Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "This is trial by surprise. We haven't had time to authenticate these documents. For all we know, this is a forgery concocted by a disgruntled father-in-law." "Authentication." Arthur Sterling laughed softly. It was a dry, rasping sound. "Check the footer on page 4, Mr. Halloway, who notarized that agreement 10 years ago." Richard looked. His eyes widened. He slumped slightly. It was my firm, Halloway and Associates." "Your father, actually," Arthur noted, leaning on his cane. "Old Marcus Halloway. A good man. He set up the blind trust for me back when I sold my patents to the Defense Department in the 80s. He knew how to keep a secret. It seems he didn't share his client list with his son." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "Patents Defense Department. You fixed watches in a strip mall in Queens." Arthur turned his gaze to Daniel. "I repaired timepieces because I enjoy precision. Daniel, it calms the mind. But before I retired, I designed guidance systems for naval navigation. I made my fortune before you were born. I just chose not to live like a peacock, unlike you." Daniel stood up his chair, scraping violently against the floor. "This is insane. You can't just take my company. I built Bennett and Company. I secured the government logistics contract. That contract is worth $400 million. "Correction," Sarah spoke up from the plaintiff's table. Her voice was clear, ringing through the stunned courtroom. "You secured the contract based on the software's capability to handle encrypted supply chain data. That encryption. That's my code, Daniel. That's vector logic." Sarah stood and walked toward the center of the room, standing beside her father. The dynamic had shifted entirely. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the executioner. "For 10 years," Sarah continued, looking at her husband with pity. "You told me I was bad at business. You told me to stay home to handle the boring stuff while you went to dinners and closed deals. You didn't realize that the boring stuff was the engine of the entire car. Every time you needed an update, every time the system crashed and you called me in a panic at 2:00 a.m. I wasn't just fixing it. I was renewing the digital signature. My signature." Daniel looked at his hands. He remembered those nights. He would be screaming at her to fix the damn thing so he wouldn't look bad to investors. She would sit at her laptop typing silently, and 10 minutes later everything would work. He never thanked her. He just took the credit. So here is where we stand. Arthur said, his voice hard. We are revoking the license. As of this moment, Bennett and Company has no legal right to use the software. That means your government contract is fraudulent. You promised them technology you no longer possess. You can't do that, Daniel screamed, stepping toward them. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his holster, but Daniel stopped. If you pull the license, the company collapses. The stock goes to zero. I go to jail for fraud. You'll destroy everything. We know, Sarah said. She smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Daniel had ever seen. That's the price, Daniel. You wanted 90% of the assets. Fine. Take 90% of the debt. Take 90% of the lawsuits. Take 90% of the prison sentence. Your Honor, Richard squeaked. We request an immediate recess. We need to confer with my client. Judge Parker looked at the clock. She looked at Daniel, who was trembling, and at Sarah, who stood like a statue of justice. Court is in recess for 1 hour, Judge Parker declared, banging the gavel. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Halloway, I suggest you use this time very, very wisely. If these documents are valid, you are not just looking at a divorce settlement. You are looking at a federal indictment. The hallway outside courtroom 304 was a chaotic blur of noise and panic. Richard Halloway dragged Daniel into a small private consultation room and slammed the door, locking it. You idiot, Richard hissed, throwing his briefcase onto the table. You absolute arrogant idiot. You told me her father was a nobody. You told me she was a housewife with a hobby. I didn't know. Daniel paced the small room, tearing at his tie. He felt like he was suffocating. He lived in a split level in Queens. He drove a 2004 Ford Taurus. How was I supposed to know he was some kind of stealth millionaire genius? It doesn't matter what you knew, Richard yelled. It matters what you signed. I just pulled the digital records from the firm's archives. My father did notarize it. The trust is ironclad, Daniel. It's a poison pill trust. It was designed specifically for this scenario. If Sarah gets divorced, the assets snap back to the trust. It's a trap set 10 years ago waiting for you to mess up. Daniel leaned against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He put his head in his hands. The government deal. The auditors are coming next week. If the software license is invalid, they'll see it. They'll charge me with procuring a government contract under false pretenses. That's 20 years, Richard. 20 years. Then we have to settle, Richard said, pacing. We have to beg. You have to go out there, find Sarah, and give her whatever she wants. Forget the 90%. Give her 50. Give her 70. Hell, give her the Hamptons house and the dog. We just need that license active. Daniel looked up. His eyes were red. She doesn't want the house, Richard. Didn't you see her face? She wants blood. Then offer her more blood, Richard snapped. Offer her your blood. Beg. Daniel stood up. He adjusted his jacket. He smoothed his hair. He was a salesman. He had sold ice to Eskimos. He could sell this. He just needed to find the right angle. Sarah loved him once. Deep down, she was still that soft, quiet girl who looked at him with adoration. He could manipulate that. He had to. Stay here, Daniel said. I'll handle Sarah. Daniel walked out of the room. He scanned the hallway. The court was busy, lawyers and clients bustling about. He saw them at the end of the corridor near the windows. Sarah was standing with her back to him, looking out at the city skyline. Arthur sat on a bench nearby, reading a newspaper, as if he hadn't just dropped a nuclear bomb on Daniel's life. Timothy, Sarah's lawyer, was nowhere to be seen. Daniel took a deep breath. He put on his sincere apology face, eyes slightly downturned, mouth soft. He walked over. "Sarah," he said gently. She didn't turn around. "You have 40 minutes, Daniel." "Sarah, please," he said, moving closer, lowering his voice to an intimate whisper. "Can we just talk? No lawyers. No fathers. Just us. Daniel and Sarah. The team." Sarah finally turned. Her expression was unreadable. "There hasn't been a team for a long time, Daniel. There was just you and the staff you slept with." Daniel flinched. So she knew about Jessica. He decided to pivot. "I know I've made mistakes," Daniel said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. "I got lost, Sarah. The pressure of the company, the stress, I lost sight of what mattered. But we built this together. You said it yourself, it's your code. Do you really want to see your hard work burn? Do you want to see me in prison?" He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but her hand was cold and limp. "I can change," Daniel pleaded. "Drop this trust nonsense. Sign the original agreement. I'll give you half. 50-50. We can be partners. Real partners this time. I'll fire Jessica. I'll fire everyone. Just don't destroy me." Sarah looked at him, studying his face as if looking for a trace of the man she had married. "You're scared," she observed quietly. "Of course I'm scared. I'm about to lose everything." "No, Daniel," Sarah said, pulling her hand away. "You're not scared of losing me. You're scared of being poor. You're scared of looking like a failure to your friends at the country club." "That's not true." "It is true," she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen and held it up to him. It was a screenshot of a text message, not the one to Jessica, a different one Daniel had sent to his fraternity brother Mark 3 days ago. Text: "Finally dumping the dead weight. Sarah's out. I get the cash, she gets the cat. Going to upgrade to a model by next month. Life begins at 40, brother." Daniel stared at the screen. How did you get that?" "I told you," Sarah said, putting the phone away. "I wrote the code, Daniel. The company phones run on a secure server that I administer. I've seen every text, every email, every bank transfer you've made to your mistresses for the last 5 years. Daniel stepped back, horrified. He had been living in a glass house, throwing stones while she held the Windex. "I stayed because I hoped you would change," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "I stayed because I took my vows seriously. But when you served me those papers, when you tried to leave me with nothing after I gave you everything, that was the moment you died to me." "Sarah, wait. No." Arthur's voice boomed. Daniel jumped. The old man had folded his newspaper and was standing up. "You're done talking to my daughter," Arthur said. He walked over his cane, tapping rhythmically. He stopped inches from Daniel's face. The old man smelled of peppermint and gun oil. "Here is the new deal," Arthur said. "Because I am a benevolent man, and because I don't want my daughter to spend the next 2 years testifying in your fraud trial." Daniel's heart leaped. A deal? There was a way out. "Anything. Name it." "You will sign over 100% of Bennett and Comte to Sarah," Arthur said. "You will vacate the Hamptons house by midnight tonight. You will resign as CEO effective immediately." "What, that leaves me with nothing?" Daniel cried. "Not nothing," Arthur corrected. "If you do this, we will grant a retroactive license for the software for the duration of the government contract. The company survives. You won't go to prison for fraud." You will walk away free with your freedom and your wardrobe, but not a penny of the company's money." Daniel stared at them. They were asking him to walk away naked, to give up the identity he had crafted for a decade. "And if I refuse," Daniel challenged, trying to find one last scrap of leverage, "if I fight, this trust thing will take years to litigate. I'll drag it out. I'll burn the company down myself before I let you have it." Arthur smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. "You can try," Arthur said, "but this drive contains the forensic audit I commissioned 3 months ago. It details how you've been funneling company funds into offshore accounts in the Caymans to avoid taxes. That's not just a civil suit, Daniel. That's IRS tax evasion and corporate embezzlement. The FBI loves cases like this." Daniel looked at the flash drive. It glinted under the hallway lights like a bullet. "The choice is yours," Sarah said softly. "Walk away with your freedom or leave in handcuffs. You have 5 minutes before the judge returns." Daniel looked at the double doors of the courtroom. He looked at Richard, who was peering out of the consultation room, shaking his head, frantically mouthing the word, "sign." The king of logistics realized he had been checkmated 5 moves ago. He just hadn't been paying attention to the board. "Fine," Daniel whispered, his voice broken. "I'll sign." "Good," Arthur said, turning his back on him. "Get the paperwork, Sarah. I'll hold the door." But as Daniel watched them turn away, a dark, desperate thought formed in his mind. He was cornered. He was beaten. But he wasn't dead yet. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man in the room. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had sworn never to call, a number belonging to a man named Vinny, a loan shark from his early days who handled problems that lawyers couldn't. "If I can't have the company," Daniel thought, his thumb hovering over the call button, "no one will." Daniel Bennett walked back into the main well of courtroom 304, but he didn't feel like a man walking toward a surrender. He felt like a soldier carrying a grenade into a bunker. To the external world, to Judge Parker peering over her spectacles, to the stenographer massaging her wrists, and even to his own terrified lawyer, Daniel looked defeated. His shoulders were slumped forward, collapsing the sharp lines of his Italian suit. His head hung low, his eyes fixed on the parquet floor. He looked like a king who had been stripped of his crown, dragged through the mud, and forced to kneel. "We accept," Richard Halloway announced, his voice, a dry husk of its former baritone. He was wiping sweat from his upper lip with a monogrammed handkerchief that was already damp. "My client, Mr. Bennett, agrees to the terms proposed by Mr. Sterling. Full transfer of assets. Immediate resignation from all executive posts. We will sign the addendum." Judge Parker leaned back the leather of her chair, creaking in the silence. She studied Daniel with a mixture of professional scrutiny and mild surprise. She had seen men like Daniel Bennett before. Usually they fought until the money ran out. They burned through appeals motions and delays just to spite their ex-wives. For him to fold this quickly was unusual. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Parker said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "Do you confirm this statement? You understand the gravity of what is being proposed. You are essentially walking away from a decade of work with nothing but your personal effects and your freedom." Daniel stopped at the defense table. He placed his hands on the cool wood. He took a slow, shaky breath, a perfect performance of a man trying not to cry. "I confirm, Your Honor," Daniel said softly. I want this to be over. I want to move on with my life." "Very well," The judge nodded, though her eyes remained narrowed. "Counsel for the plaintiff, please prepare the stipulation." As Timothy Sarah's lawyer began frantically scribbling the handwritten addendum to the divorce decree, Daniel sat down. He pulled his chair in close to the table, creating a private shadow beneath the mahogany surface. His heart wasn't breaking. It was hammering with the rhythmic, toxic beat of pure adrenaline. "They think they've won." Daniel thought a cold sneer forming in his mind, invisible to the room. Arthur thinks he's a genius. Sarah thinks she's liberated. They think they can take my company, my legacy, and hand it over to a woman whose biggest ambition used to be planting hydrangeas. He looked over at the plaintiff's table. Sarah was whispering something to her father. Arthur was nodding, looking stoic and smug. They looked like they were already planning the victory dinner. Maybe a nice steakhouse. Maybe a toast to the end of Daniel Bennett. Daniel slowly slid his right hand into his pocket. His fingers brushed against the cold metal of his smartphone. He wasn't going to let them have it. If he couldn't be the CEO of Bennett & Co., then Bennett & Co. would cease to exist. 3 years ago, during a period of intense paranoia, fueled by too much caffeine and not enough sleep, Daniel had contacted a darker element of his professional network. He had found a freelance engineer in Estonia, a man who didn't ask questions as long as the crypto transfer cleared. Daniel had paid him $50,000 to install a fail-safe in the server farm in New Jersey. It wasn't a software virus, it was hardware. A localized electromagnetic pulse generator, an EMP disguised as a backup uninterruptible power supply unit in the main server rack. It was wired to a remote trigger. If activated, it wouldn't just delete data. It would physically fuse the hard drives. It would turn the multi-million-dollar server architecture into a pile of warm, useless slag. The source code, the encryption keys, the government logistics data, all of it would be gone. Irrecoverable. He called it the Samson option. If the temple comes down, everyone dies. "Here is the document, Mr. Bennett," Timothy said, walking over and placing a sheet of legal pad paper in front of him. The handwriting was hurried but legible. "I, Daniel Bennett, hereby transfer 100% of my equity in Bennett & Co. Resign as CEO. Waive all claims." Daniel picked up the heavy fountain pen. He looked at Richard. Richard was staring at the wall, looking like he was calculating his malpractice insurance premiums. "Sign it, Daniel," Richard whispered, not looking at him. "Just sign it, and let's get out of here, before the old man changes his mind and calls the IRS. "I'm signing, Richard. Relax," Daniel murmured. Under the table, Daniel pulled his phone out. He kept it low, shielded by his thigh. He unlocked it with a thumbprint. The screen glowed dimly. He swiped to the third page of his apps to a folder labeled Utilities and opened an app that looked like a generic calculator. He held the pen over the paper with his left hand, feigning hesitation. With his right hand under the table, he typed the sequence. 6, 6, 6, 9, 9. The calculator interface vanished. The screen turned a stark, warning red. A prompt appeared in simple white text. "Initiate protocol. Krakatoa warning. Irreversible hardware failure. Imminent. Confirm. /cancel." Daniel looked up at Sarah one last time. She was looking at him now. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. It made him sick. She didn't deserve his empire. She didn't deserve the power. "Burn it," the voice in his head screamed. Burn it all down. His thumb hovered over confirm. At the exact same moment, his left hand lowered the pen to the paper. He pressed the button on the screen. Command sent countdown, 60 seconds. A rush of dopamine hit Daniel so hard he almost dizzy. He scribbled his signature on the paper. Daniel J. Bennett. The signature was jagged aggressive. He slid the phone back into his pocket. The timer was running. 1 minute. In 60 seconds, the capacitors in New Jersey would discharge. The fans would stop. The lights would blink out. And Bennett and Company would become nothing more than a memory. There. Daniel said, his voice stronger now. He shoved the paper toward Timothy. It's done. It's all yours, Sarah. The whole kingdom. I hope you know how to rule it. Timothy took the paper, checked the signature, and handed it to the bailiff, who walked it up to Judge Parker. The court accepts the stipulation, Judge Parker announced, stamping the file with a heavy thunk that sounded like a final judgment. The divorce is final. The assets are transferred, effective immediately. Mr. Bennett, you are to vacate the premises of the company by close of business today. I'm leaving right now, Daniel said, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He needed to be outside. He needed to be in the elevator or, better yet, in a cab when the notifications started rolling in. He wanted to be far away when Sarah's phone started buzzing with the panicked calls from the IT director, screaming that the servers were melting. He buttoned his suit jacket, smoothing the fabric over his chest. He felt lighter. He felt powerful again. He had lost the battle, but he had nuked the battlefield. Let's go, Richard, Daniel commanded, turning on his heel. Daniel! Sarah's voice cut through the air. It wasn't a shout. It was a conversational tone, calm and clear. But it stopped Daniel dead in his tracks. He was 3 steps away from the gate. He turned around, annoyed. What now, Sarah? Do you want a blood sample too? You have everything. Sarah was standing. She had moved out from behind the plaintiff's table and was standing in the center aisle, blocking his path to the door. She wasn't smiling. She looked disappointed. Aren't you going to check your phone? She asked. Daniel frowned, his brow furrowing. Excuse me. Your phone, Sarah repeated, pointing toward his pocket where the device was currently counting down. The Samson option. The dead man's switch. Usually a system like that sends a confirmation text when the trigger is received. Did you get it? The silence that fell over the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of Daniel's lungs. His hand twitched. How could she possibly know the name? How could she know about the app? He had never told a soul. Not Richard. Not Jessica. Not even the engineer knew who he was really working for. I don't know what you're talking about, Daniel stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. A cold sweat broke out instantly across his back. The EMP in the New Jersey server farm. Arthur spoke up from the bench. The old man didn't even look up from his papers. Rack 4, Unit B, disguised as a backup battery. Clever engineering. Crude, but clever. Daniel felt the room spinning. You found it. I found it 6 months ago, Sarah said, taking a step closer. Her heels clicked on the floor, sounding like gunshots in the quiet room. I was doing a routine thermal audit of the cooling systems. Unit B was running 3 degrees hotter than the others. I opened it up. Daniel's mind raced. If she found it, she must have disabled it. That meant the company was safe. Fine, he thought desperately. So I didn't destroy it. At least I'm not in trouble. I just walk away. So you disconnected it. Daniel let out a nervous laugh. Congratulations. You saved the hardware. Good for you. Now if you'll excuse me. I didn't disconnect it, Daniel, Sarah said. Daniel stopped. Daniel, what? If I had disconnected it, you would have seen the offline status in your app. Sarah explained, her voice dropping to a dangerous conspiratorial whisper. You would have known your trap was broken, and I needed you to feel safe. I needed you to feel arrogant enough to press that button. So, what did you do? Daniel whispered. The countdown in his pocket must be at 0, but nothing was happening. I rewired the output, Sarah said simply. I redirected the signal. When you pressed confirm just now, you didn't send a voltage spike to the hard drives. Then what did I trigger? Daniel yelled, his composure shattering. What did I just do? Sarah raised her hand and pointed past Daniel toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. You triggered a silent alarm, Sarah said. A specific digital distress beacon I set up, one that is monitored directly by the Cyber Crimes Division. Daniel whipped his head around to look at the doors. I told you, Daniel, Sarah said, her voice sounding far away as the blood rushed in his ears. I wrote the code. You were playing checkers. I was programming the board. At that moment, the heavy oak doors groaned. They didn't open slowly. They were shoved open with force. Daniel Bennett froze. He realized with a sickening jolt of clarity that the 60-second countdown hadn't been for the servers. It had been for him. The sudden violence of the doors swinging open shattered the courtroom's stillness. It wasn't a clerk or a lost tourist. 4 men strode into the room, moving with the synchronized predatory efficiency of a wolf pack. They wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering on the back, FBI. Behind them walked a stern man in a charcoal suit, carrying a reinforced briefcase. Daniel stumbled back, his hips colliding painfully with the defense table. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. What is this, Richard? Do something. Richard Halloway did do something. He physically recoiled, stepping 2 feet away from Daniel, holding his hands up in a universal gesture of surrender. I'm not involved, Richard stammered, his eyes wide. I am legal counsel for the divorce only. I have no knowledge of my client's extrajudicial activities. The lead agent, a tall man with a buzz cut and eyes like flint, didn't even look at the lawyer. He walked straight to Daniel, closing the distance in 3 long strides. Daniel Bennett, the agent barked. Yes, but I'm Special Agent Miller, Cyber Crimes Division. You are under arrest. Arrest? Daniel's voice rose to a shrill screech. For what I signed the papers, I gave her the damn company. This is harassment. We're not here for the divorce settlement, Mr. Bennett, Agent Miller said, his voice flat and bored. He reached for his belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. We received a digital alert at 1:42 p.m. indicating an attempted catastrophic purge of a Tier 1 secure server housing classified Department of Defense logistics data. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. It was a glitch. It was my server, I own it. Correction. Arthur Sterling's voice cut through the chaos. Daniel looked over. The old watchmaker was standing now, leaning comfortably on his cane, looking at Daniel with the detached interest of a man inspecting a broken clock mechanism. You signed the addendum at 1:41 p.m., Arthur noted, checking his pocket watch. At the exact moment you pressed that button in your pocket, Bennett and Company, and every piece of hardware inside it became the sole property of Sarah Sterling. And since those servers host federal government data, trying to fry them, isn't just vandalism, Daniel. Sarah stepped forward, her voice soft but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. It's a violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It's attempted destruction of government property. It's cyber-terrorism. Daniel stared at her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The timing, the pressure to sign, the dead man's switch she had left intact. It was all a funnel. She hadn't just defeated him. She had guided him step by arrogant step into his own grave. "You set me up," Daniel hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You baited me. I gave you a choice, Daniel." Sarah said, her expression full of pity, which hurt him more than anger ever could. "I begged you to just talk to me. I offered you a clean break. You could have walked out of here a free man. But I knew you. I knew your ego wouldn't let you lose. I knew that if you couldn't be the king, you'd try to burn the castle." She leaned in closer, whispering, so only he could hear over the sound of the agents grabbing his arms. "My father taught me that a watch is only as good as its smallest gear. You forgot the small gears, Daniel. You forgot me." Agent Miller spun Daniel around. "Hands behind your back." "No, you can't do this," Daniel screamed as the cold steel ratcheted tight around his wrists. "I am Daniel Bennett. I am the CEO, Richard. Call the governor. Call someone." But Richard Halloway was already busy shoving papers into his briefcase, refusing to make eye contact. As they frog-marched Daniel toward the doors, he twisted his head back. He saw the courtroom one last time. He saw the judge looking down with disdain. He saw the empty chair where he had sat thinking he was winning. And he saw Sarah. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't laughing. She was just standing there, her hand resting gently on her father's arm. She looked strong. She looked like a woman who had finally exhaled after holding her breath for 10 years. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off Daniel's desperate screams. The silence that followed was heavy but clean. "Well," Judge Parker said, exhaling a long breath and taking off her glasses. "That was certainly the most eventful conclusion to a divorce proceeding I have ever presided over." Arthur Sterling adjusted his flat cap. He looked at his daughter. "You okay, kiddo?" Sarah looked at the closed doors, then back at her father. She smiled, and for the first time in a decade, it reached her eyes. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, picking up the cracked leather folder, the trust that had been her shield. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I have a company to fix." "You'll need to patch that back end." Arthur noted his eyes twinkling. "Security protocols are a mess." "Already wrote the patch last night," Sarah replied, taking his arm. "Let's go. I'm buying lunch, and Dad." "You can pick the wine." The fall of Daniel Bennett was as rapid as his rise. Without the company lawyers to shield him, and with the digital evidence Sarah provided, the federal case was swift. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and attempted destruction of government property. The friends he had impressed with his champagne lifestyle never visited. His mistress Jessica sold her story to a tabloid for $5,000 and vanished to Los Angeles. Sarah Sterling, however, did not vanish. She took the helm of Sterling Bennett Logic, rebranding it simply as Vector Systems. Under her quiet, competent leadership, the company didn't just survive, it thrived. She didn't buy a yacht or a penthouse. She bought a small brownstone in Chelsea with a studio where she painted on weekends, and she built a state-of-the-art workshop for her father. Arthur Sterling spent his remaining years doing exactly what he loved, fixing broken things. In the end, Daniel Bennett learned the hard way that life isn't about how fast you climb or how loud you shout. It's about the quality of the foundation you build. He spent his life trying to own the time, while the quiet watchmaker and his daughter were the only ones who knew how to truly master it. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes justice and the ultimate karma, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We bring you the best stories of revenge and redemption every week. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the quietest people often have the loudest minds. Thanks for watching.